Hi everyone, welcome to upklyak, where I like to talk about the automotive industry, specifically in Australia. As promised in my previous video, I'm talking about BEV versus ICE depreciation and whether there is a difference between the two. Once again, I'm getting into this topic from the comment sections, where some people insist EVs have better resale value or lower depreciation versus the equivalent ICE. As much as I love to find data and information for the Australian market, unfortunately, I'm unable to find too much local data. But the good news is, both the US and UK have had more EVs available for a much longer period of time. And most importantly, they have research available. So I'd like to start off today with a study done in the US by IC Cars, which to my understanding is something like Australia's carsales.com.au, where they offer a platform for used vehicle sales, and therefore have data on advertised price of used vehicles and also their sales data. Number two, I'd like to point out is this is dated only November 2022, so only a few months ago. And another thing is this research has had a sample size of over 3 million used cars. If you guys want to check it out, I'll leave the link down below. Now, I personally really enjoyed reading this as there's so much information, and they also compared between 3 and 5 years depreciation as well. In summary, we can see the Jeep Wrangler remains the best vehicle in holding its value, which is a bit of a surprise to me, as that tends to not be the case in Australia. The second point is, due to unprecedented supply and demand issues, the 3-year depreciation averaged a 17% decline in value only. And thirdly, what they found is fuel-efficient cars are holding their value the best. Finally, just like in Australia, the worst depreciating cars are luxury vehicles. When we look at the breakdown of the top 10 cars, which held most of its value after 5 years, we can see some similarities to our market here. I found two things that are particularly interesting. One is, all of these top 10 vehicles are ICE. And second, quite a few of them are just everyday, mundane cars. Moving on, when we look at the most depreciated vehicles in 5 years, it's no surprise that they are all luxury vehicles. And one thing in common once again is we can see they are all luxurious ICE vehicles. We'll come back to the 3 years later and move down to 5 years depreciation by segment. As we look at the small SUV segment, leaving out the Jeeps, we can see the Crosstrek or the Subaru XV, Honda HR-V and RAV4 are some of the best vehicles from depreciation point of view, and that the average across all small SUVs are at 29.1%. We can see some of the worst performers here, including Volkswagen, GMC, Chevrolet, Ford, and Mitsubishi Outlander. So one thing I just want us to keep in mind as we move forward is within the small SUV, the average is around 29-30% depreciation after 5 years, which is pretty good. And as we progress into medium or mid-size SUV, we can see the Highlander is right up there at 31.8%. Highlander is also our Toyota Kluger locally in Australia. So we can see the average here is quite a bit higher because in the beginning of the research, it already mentioned that fuel-efficient cars, they do have better resale value and lower depreciation. As we move on, this is where I found particularly interesting. When they broke down the vehicles by hybrid, we can see the majority of the hybrids sit somewhere between 22 to 41%. And the average of all hybrid vehicles, depreciation is around the 28.8% in 5 years' time. And this is particularly interesting as soon as we compare that with electric vehicles. So these BEVs, including the Model X and Model S, obviously have a higher depreciation than the hybrid vehicles that we can see here. And not only that, you also have to keep in mind a majority of these equivalent electric vehicles compared to these hybrid vehicles, they have a higher buy price when new, which means in terms of dollar value, even if the percentages are the same in depreciation, the EV would have lost more money in dollar. But then, obviously, throughout the 5 years of ownership, you are most very likely to have made your money back through paying for electricity instead of fuel, which I've already talked about in the previous video. And as we come to the small cars, once again, as per the research I've mentioned already, these small and fuel-efficient cars tend to hold their value a lot better than the bigger and more expensive competitors. Even the very, very worst car, as you can see here, is only down 32.3% versus some of those that are close to 50%, bigger cars that are close to 50%. Sports cars, as expected, they hold the value very well as well. And finally, into the utes and trucks, they too hold very well in value. And given the age of some of the Rivian as well as the F-150 Lightning, obviously they don't have data in the 5-year depreciation just yet, but I would be really keen to find out when they do come through. Now, as we move back to the 3 years depreciation, this is where I found interesting stuff. Starting off with 5 vehicles, which is worth more than new after 3 years of ownership. And the Toyota RAV4 hybrid was an interesting one for me. When you look at the comment sections of any EV website, you'll find people attacking hybrid vehicles like it's the work of the devil. However, we can see the RAV4 hybrid being one out of the 5 vehicles in the US to increase in value after 3 years. And if you think about depreciation, this is a very simple supply and demand equation, showing there is high demand on these 5 vehicles. And once again, the common factor between all 5 of these are ICE vehicles. Now obviously these 5 are the exception rather than the rule. As we progress down to the top 10 vehicles with the lowest depreciation, surprisingly find most of them are just mundane everyday vehicles, like the Civic, the Crosstrek or the XV, Toyota CHR, the Toyota RAV4, Corolla, Rio. Another thing that's worth mentioning is we can see the Tesla Model 3 here. In percentage, we can see it's 4.1% in depreciation, but once again, when you look at dollar figures, due to the higher purchase price to begin with, it is more than some of these other cars we can see up here. Once again, this is covered by the money you do save throughout the first 3 years of ownership, obviously. So now that we have looked at the US, let's have a quick look at the UK. This is a research done by a leasing company in UK. And this study is dated a little bit older than what I'd like, back in January 2022, where they compare the prices of the UK's most popular used cars against the number of miles they have done. My understanding is Lease Local is a car lease managing company with solid data on vehicle resale value as they on-sell them after their customers conclude their leases. Their finding was, on average, the most popular EVs depreciate 55 pence per mile, while the most popular ICE vehicle depreciated 67 pence per mile, or 22% worse off. And since 2019, London has introduced the ultra-low emission zone. And in November 2022, this zone has grown in size, covering more area of London. And in August 2023, it will grow again, where non-compliant ICE cars are required to pay a toll or fine for driving their vehicle within the zone. And that is a £12.50 per day charge. On top of this, new petrol and diesel cars will be banned in 2030. It will be interesting to see what happens when that transition comes. Will ICE cars' value continue to plummet, or actually grow in the short term due to the sudden cease of existence? Another thing that was really interesting, as we can see, there are still some ICE vehicles that are pretty low down or high up in this chart in terms of depreciation. And not only that, we can also see very similar cars and comparable cars such as the Golf has better depreciation than the ID3. The Mini petrol also have better depreciation than the Mini EV. And obviously we would have noticed Tesla Model 3 here, which have pretty solid depreciation in the UK, given it is quite a bit more brand new compared to some of these other ones, especially the budget EVs such as the MG and the Corsa here. So all this is really interesting to me. So in conclusion, the US is showing ICE vehicles still have a solid resale value, especially when compared to BEVs. And in a market where the BEV market share sits steadily at around 5 to 6%, I have a feeling Australia will see a similar trend when BEV supply normalizes. However, if our government choose an approach similar to the UK, with zones where ICE vehicles require to pay a toll to enter, then it is very likely EVs and BEVs will have a lower depreciation as a result. And finally, the last point that I haven't really raised yet, but locally in Melbourne, BEVs have a $3,000 subsidy. When this discontinues, there would likely be a small spike up in used BEV value because essentially they've gone up by $3,000. Or new BEV prices do come down before this subsidy runs out. They are already on its very close parity to the equivalent ICE vehicles. So that's all I've got today. Thank you very much for hearing me out. Feel free to let me know what you think, and if these are the kind of stuff you'd like to listen to, please feel free to like and subscribe. Thank you, and I'll catch you next time.